Section 3, The French Revolution. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The French Revolution by Hilaire Belloc. Section 3, Chapter 1, concluded. Such is the general theory of the Revolution, to which the command of Jean-Jacques Rousseau over the French tongue gave imperishable expression in that book whose style and logical connection may be compared to some exact and strong piece of engineering. He entitled it The Contrat Social, and it became the formula of the revolutionary creed. But though no man perhaps has put the prime truth of political morals so well, that truth was as old as the world. It appears in the passionate rhetoric of 100 leaders, and has stood at the head or has been woven into the laws of free states without number. In the English language, the Declaration of Independence is perhaps its noblest expression, and though this document was posterior to the great work of Rousseau, and though the genius of Jefferson was in some part descended from it, its language, and still more the actions of those who drafted and supported it, are sufficient to explain what I mean to the English readers. Now, with this general theory there stands connected on the one hand certain great principles without which it would have no meaning, and also, on the other hand, a number of minor points concerning no more than the machinery of politics. The first are vital to democracy. The second, in spite of their great popularity at the time of the Revolution, and of the sanction which the Revolution gave them, nay, of their universality, since the Revolution have in reality nothing to do with the revolutionary theory itself. Of these two categories, the type of the first is the doctrine of the equality of man. The type of the second is the mere machinery called representative. The doctrine of the equality of the man is a transcendent doctrine, a dogma, as we call such doctrines in the field of transcendental religion. It corresponds to no physical reality which we can grasp. It is hardly to be adumbrated even by metaphors drawn from physical objects. We may attempt to rationalize it by saying that what is common to all men is not more important, but infinitely more important than the accident by which men differ. We may compare human attributes to tridimensional and personal attributes to bidimensional measurements. We may say that whatever man has of his nature is all the standards of man, and we may show that in all such things men are potentially equal. None of these metaphors explains the matter. Still less do any of them satisfy the demand of those to whom the dogma may be incomprehensible. Its truth is to be arrived at for these in a negative manner. If men are not equal, then no scheme of jurisprudence, no act of justice, no movement of human indignation, no exaltation of fellowship has any meaning. The doctrine of the equality of man is one which, like many of the great transcendental doctrines, may be proved by the results consequent upon its absence. It is in man to believe it, and all lively societies believe it. It is certainly not in man to prove the equality of men, save, as I have said, by negation. But it demands no considerable intellectual facility to perceive that void of the doctrine of equality. The conception of political freedom and a community's moral right to self-government disappear. Now, to believe that doctrine positively, and to believe it ardently, to go on crusade for that religious point, was indeed characteristic of the French. It required the peculiar and inherited religious temper of the French, which had for so many hundred years seized and defined point after point in the character of man, to grow enamoured of this definition, and to feel it not in the intellect, but as it were in their bones. They became soldiers for it, and that enormous march of theirs overrunning Europe, which may not inaptly be compared to their adventures in the 12th century when they engaged upon the Crusades, was inspired by no one part of the doctrine, of political freedom more strongly than by this doctrine of equality. The scorn which was in those days universally felt for that pride which associates itself with the things not inherent to a man, notably and most absurdly with capricious differences of wealth, never ran higher, and the passionate sense of justice which springs from this profound and fundamental social dogma of equality, as it moved France during the Revolution to frenzy, so also moved it to creation. Those who ask how it was that a group of men sustaining all the weight of civil conflict within and of universal war without, yet made time enough in 20 years to frame the codes which govern modern Europe, to lay down the foundation of universal education, of a strictly impersonal scheme of administration, and even in detail to remodel the material face of society, in a word, to make modern Europe, must be content for their reply to learn that the Republican energy had for its flame and its excitant this vision, a sense almost physical of the equality of man. The minor points which wove themselves into the political practice of democracy during the Revolution, which are not of its principles, and which would not, were they abstracted, affect its essence, are of quite another and less noble kind. I have taken as the chief of these the machinery of deputation or of representation. The representative system had been designed for a particular purpose under the influence of the Church, and especially of the monastic orders who invented it in the Middle Ages. It had been practiced as a useful check upon the national monarchy in France, and as a useful form of national expression in times of crisis, or when national initiative was peculiarly demanded. In Spain it became, as the Middle Ages proceeded, a very vital national and local thing, varying from place to place. It is not surprising that Spain, seeing that in her territory the first experiments in representation were made, should have thus preserved it popular and alive. In England, representation, vigorous as everywhere else in the true Middle Ages, narrowed and decayed at their close, until in the 17th century it had become a mere scheme for aristocratic government. In France, for nearly 200 years before the Revolution, it had fallen into disuse, but an active memory of it still remained, especially a memory of its value in critical moments, when a consultation of the whole people was required, and when the corporate initiative of the whole people must be set at work in order to save the state. It is no wonder, therefore, that the French, on the eve of the Revolution, clamoured for a revival of representation, or, as the system was called in its French tongue, the States General. But as a permanent machine of government, no one in Europe had the least idea how the system might serve the ends of democracy. In England, democracy was not practiced, nor was representation connected with the conception of it. The nation had forgotten democracy as completely as it had forgotten the religion and the old ideals of the Middle Ages. In those parts of Christendom in which this ancient Christian institution of a parliament had not narrowed to be the mask of an oligarchy or dwindled to be a mere provincial custom, its use had disappeared. The ancient function of representation, when it had been most lively and vigorous, that is, in the Middle Ages, was occasionally to initiate a national policy in critical moments, but more generally to grant taxes. What a democratic parliament might do, no one in 1789 could conceive. There was indeed one great example of democratic representation in existence, the example of the United States. But the conditions were wholly different from those of Europe. No true central power yet existed there, no ancient central institution, no crown, nor any custom of the city. The numbers over which American representative democracy then held power were not to be compared to the 25 millions who inhabited the French realm, and even so, most of what counted in their lives was regulated by a system of highly local autonomy,